So, welcome to today's session. We know this is a really popular one and a topic that resonates really deeply across the sector. Charity leaders, carry a really significant responsibility from funding pressures and governance, or demands on the governance, through to supporting the team through uncertain times and changing times often in the sector as well. And quite often that comes at the expense of personal well-being, and burnout is becoming so common across the sector. So we thought it was a really good idea to put on a session today about practical ways in which leaders can look after themselves and continue to lead effectively in difficult times. We're delighted to be joined by Alex today. Alex is a coaching psychologist with over 20 years experience working alongside the charity sector. She's got a great combination of sector understanding and evidence-based psychological insights, and she works with leaders to really help them make a difference without sacrificing their own health and well-being in the process. So hopefully you'll get some tips and some thought-provoking ideas from today. And Alex, we're absolutely delighted to welcome you as our guest speaker. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've got some slides to share, so let me pop those up just because they'll help keep me on track to make sure I don't ramble off down some little rabbit holes, which often I might find myself doing. Oh, you're getting to see everything. Look at you. Right, let's pop this up. So, thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, I'm Alex. I'm a psychologist. I've got 20 years experience in the sector. So 6 of those were as a senior leader. And I work predominantly in the homelessness and mental health sector, or kind of part of the charity sector. And as a result of that, I really understand the challenges of senior leaders in the sector. You know, there's that real desire to make a difference, to want to leave the world a better place. Your kind of focus is trying to look after your teams whilst you're trying to make a big impact for the communities that you serve, manage the strategic work, plus all the day to day, and somehow think about you and your development and your well-being in that mix. And as Emily said, I now work with leaders, with charities to make those charities brilliant places to work, but also to make sure that we're thinking about staff and leadership well-being, because without thinking about the well-being of you as a leader and your staff, you can't make the difference you want to in the world. So let's have a quick look at what we're going to do. If this works for me, yes, it is going to behave. So we're going to think about why the pressures you face are systemic and they're not personal. They're not your fault or your responsibility. We're going to think briefly about the consequences for you, your work, and the charity. And then we're going to spend some time thinking about practical psychological skills that will build your resilience, support your well-being at work, and how that leads into creating a healthy workplace culture, not just for you, but for your teams as well. We've got about 40 minutes in total. I'm hoping we're going to have 10-15 minutes for questions at the end. So if anything comes up for you, as Emily said, just pop those into the chat and we'll make sure we come to them at the end. And because what we're talking about is quite personal and quite individual for us, I'm not going to be asking you to share anything broadly with the group and the people who are in this Zoom room today, but I will invite you to reflect on your own experiences at work, how work impacts on you, and what you might need to take from this session, if I can speak, and take forward with you, so that you can kind of balance that need for your well-being as well as meeting the needs of your organisation and the communities that you serve. I think it's important to say that if you're experiencing stress at work, that's not about you not being resilient enough, and we'll cover that as to why that's the case. And I think it's also important to say that when you have the pressures that you have as leaders within the sector, it's very easy to think that we can and we should just keep on going until there's time to think about what you need. But actually, it's much harder to do something about the sort of accumulated stress and the impact of that if we leave it too late. It's much easier if we can take a proactive approach. It's much more effective to managing your well-being and that of your teams and your organizations. So I suppose I just want to plant those seeds right now to sort of move through the session with us today. So I wanted to share some stats with you. It's the sector, it's not you. 91% of adults experience work-related pressure or stress over the last year, and that's from some research by Mental Health UK. And research by Fair Collective last year kind of really bears that out for the charity sector. 85% of charity leaders said that work had impacted on their mental health. So we know that work-related stress isn't an uncommon experience, but it is often something that's very difficult for us to talk about. And it's often something that we find difficult to address for ourselves and for our organisations. And if we think about the stress that charity leaders experience, it's not really surprising when we think about the state of the sector, the impact of years of austerity, of COVID, where we've all had to completely change our ways of working and pick up work that other sectors couldn't hold on to. And I think in my time in the sector, I've just seen that snowball. If I think back to when I first started in the sector, there was a bit more space, there was a bit more money, we had time, there was less pressure. And over the years, I think I've really seen that pressure change. And what you are asked to do as leaders of charities is huge in comparison to what it was. And I think that means there's no wonder that there is an impact on you. And so we have this perfect storm of stress from I suppose outside of the charity sector being asked to do more for less. But hand in hand with that, we have internalized pressure from within the sector. We have accepted, I think, that this work is hard and it is difficult. And so as leaders, we just have to keep our head down, keep going, keep pushing, just keep working until you kind of finally get through that massive to-do list, until you finally made a difference. And that you just need to keep pushing until that elusive quiet period comes, which it never does. And so that means that if you can't handle the pressure, you can't handle the stress, the problem is you, not the sector. We internalize, as I mentioned, that idea that we're not resilient enough. And that's just not true. Because if we think about what resilience isn't our ability to keep on working through ongoing stress. It's our ability to adapt to it, to manage it, and to bounce back once that stressor has ended. It's not our ability to just keep on going. So I want to invite you to just take a moment to think about whether work has impacted on you and what that might look like. And as I say, I'm not going to ask you to share that. I'm not asking you to pop it into the chat. I just want you to have a little think for yourself. So in my experience, both within the sector, working as a leader within it, and within the work I do now, it's my experience that many leaders and our staff experience chronic stress, a pervasive long-term stress. Something that we might experience if we're under a lot of pressure a lot of the time, where there is no end point. And it's really important that we find or kind of note the distinction between this and something which might be a more acute stress. So we all have periods in life, in work, where we have a stressful event, and that stress in and of itself isn't necessarily a negative thing. It can be very powerful. It can be very motivating. It can really help us if we think about the stress we experience before a job interview, when we're trying to get that funding bid in. That adrenaline we experience can carry us through, and we can utilize that in a productive way. So I don't want to kind of be saying that we're trying to alleviate or manage all stress in life. You know, stress will happen and it can be helpful to us. But when you're working in a high pressure environment where there is no let up, what we can experience is chronic stress. And that that can lead to significant impacts on us. And it can set the tone for our organization, I think. What we can see is exhaustion, overwhelm, detachment from work, feelings of guilt, which are all sort of aspects of burnout. So if we experience long-term chronic stress, what that can morph into is burnout. And that in and of itself can have a huge impact on you and your relationships and your experience of life outside of work. But what we can see in terms of impact on your work is having to work out of hours to try and catch up, constantly worrying about work and not being able to switch off. You might find that you procrastinate because things feel very difficult. We might see avoidance of work that used to feel easy, or elements of work that used to feel easy to you, which now feel too difficult. Conversations that perhaps feel really hard. And that can mean that we start to lose perspective in terms of our work, but more broadly, it can mean that your decision making becomes difficult. You just don't know what you should do. You can have a loss of confidence. And these things then sort of spiral into that feeling of firefighting. You know, you want to get to that strategic work, but you're caught up in the day to day. And once we're at that point, it's really hard to find a way to unstick ourselves, to take a step back. And this then obviously snowballs and ripples out across the organization. How you work will inform how your teams work. It impacts decision making of your organization, and that will impact your strategic work and how you meet your objectives. And as I say, it ripples out in terms of how your teams work. And so if you're telling your teams they need to take care of their well-being, they need to leave on time, they need to not work at weekends, but they see you doing that to try and manage the pressure, manage the stress, hold the organization together, they're going to copy the example that you are giving them. Now, I want to be really, really clear. I'm not sharing this perspective to try and give you something else to feel bad about or to feel guilty about. I know you're already holding a lot of those feelings if you're like anyone else that I work with. What I want to give you is a different perspective on why your well-being and thinking about your needs at work and beyond isn't a luxury, it isn't a nice to have, it isn't something that you can get to at some point down the line. It's something which is essential for you and it's essential for your organization. And the reason I think this shift of perspective is really, really important is through the work I've done with leaders over the last few years. Nearly every single leader I've worked with has told me that it feels selfish to look after their well-being, to prioritize the things they want outside of work, to stop, to slow down. And what's been really transformative for all of them is when they've shifted this perspective, when they've thought about how taking care of them enables them to be a better leader, to make a bigger difference, to be more effective. And so I hope that you can take this message as permission to start thinking about your needs as just as important as the organizations and your teams. It's not about prioritizing you before, it's saying the organization and you. We don't have to have a one or other situation. So I hope that makes sense. So quickly, why does this happen? So if we look at the research into burnout, there's some common factors that lead to people feeling like this. we're thinking about excessive workloads, a lack of control over your work, a lack of recognition and reward, a lack of support, as well as poor working relationships and bullying and dysfunctional workplace cultures. And if your experience in the sector is anything like mine and the experience of the clients I work with, a lot of that is going to ring bells for you. I see that throughout my working experience and those I've supported. And that's not dissimilar to any sector. This is what people experience across the board in organisations. But I think there's some additional things that place greater risk for those of us in the charity sector. So those norms of kind of working through, pushing through, not being resilient enough. But on top of that, there's risk of vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. There's only so much you can give. There's only so much care that you have available to you. And, if we're not looking after ourselves and we're not sort of restocking that wears out. And finally, and I think most importantly, is how important it is to make a difference for those of us working in the sector. Because, that desire to make a difference, the belief in the mission, the purpose we find in our work means that often our work is more than just a job. It's more than something we can just say goodbye to at the end of the day. It's fundamental to who we are. It's part of our identity. And this is why things like setting boundaries, saying no, not always being available, the things that we're told we should do to manage burnout, manage the impacts on work, can be so much harder for those of us in the charity sector, because it's very easy for us to equate always being available, going the extra mile, not switching off, as that's what it takes to be a good leader in the charity sector. And so when we try to set boundaries, when we try to leave on time, when we try to work in a slightly different way, it creates a values clash for us, which is why it feels so uncomfortable. And it's difficult for us to put into place those things that others say to us should be so easy to do. But it doesn't have to be like that. There are 3 things for us to think about. The first of all is prioritizing your well-being. And I sort of think about this as your foundations. We can't look after, we can't help other people if we don't put our own life jacket on first. And this, in our case, means thinking about our well-being. Second of all, developing something called psychological flexibility is what will help us take a step back, move out of firefighting, be able to do those things like set boundaries, and is a really important step for us. And then these feed into the culture of our organisation and mean that we can think about what we want that culture to be, and can be in the strategic place to be able to kind of consider the elements of what it means to have a healthy organisation. But this can be really difficult when we're firefighting, when we're under pressure. It feels counterintuitive to stop and pause and kind of think about these things like our well-being. It feels like we just need to get through, we just need to keep working, so we've got time to do that. And actually I just want to flip that on its head by stopping, taking stock, going back to our foundations. You're going to be able to get through that workload and manage that pressure much more effectively. So I want to quickly talk through and really focus on the foundations and psychological flexibility, and we'll touch upon how this feeds into your culture. So the things which support our well-being they're not rocket science. There's a huge psychological evidence base that these 5 things underpin our well-being, but they're not going to be things that you don't know. So doing things which mean that we experience positive emotions, finding flow, so getting into the zone, though, that sort of state where you're lost in an activity, you're not thinking about anything else, where you're just focused on what you're doing. Having a connection with other people relationships and spending quality time with people, feels great and it's really good for us. Having things which give us meaning and purpose in life is fundamental, but I bracket this with beyond work, because for a lot of us in the charity sector, we get a huge amount of meaning and purpose from our work, but we don't necessarily see it so easily beyond it. And this can kind of really reinforce some of that negative pattern we can find ourselves getting into. And finally, a sense of achievement for the sake of it. So that might be setting some goals for yourself and achieving it. It might be running a marathon. It might be learning a new language. It might be, I don't know, sea swimming. It doesn't matter what it is, but doing something that just gives you a sense of achievement for achievement's sake. Now, given that we probably all know what these are, you probably maybe have a nagging voice that says, I really must make time for my friends. I really must do those things that I want to do. But at the end of a hard day, that's really difficult. It might be that once you get home, dinner's done, the kids are in bed, all you've got energy for is wine and doom scrolling and Netflix. Or it might be that you feel like you need to jump back onto the laptop and prioritize work again. And it's easy to stay in this pattern of putting everything else before these things that are going to help you. So this is where I really come to this idea of reframing. I think there is a chance that you say things to yourself like, I have so much to do. If I just log on, I can get ahead. I can clear the decks for tomorrow. Being a good leader means that I'm always available. If I'm not working, I'm letting people down. And as I said before, this is why prioritizing things like this by setting boundaries is really challenging. And so I would really like you to think about how you can reframe that idea of what a good leader is. So I've put an example here of a statement that perhaps you could use. That to be a good leader, I need to stop and take a break. So I think I can think clearly, be efficient and good work and do good work. Now, that isn't going to be the right statement for all of you, but it could perhaps be something that helps you create a statement that can link your desire to lead well with that permission to stop and recharge yourself or have a break or do something you enjoy because you understand that it's going to help you lead better. So we haven't got a huge amount of time, so I'm not going to ask you to think about this now, but I would like to encourage you to take that away as something to think about after today's session. So psychological flexibility, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about, and I want to give you sort of 3 elements of this to take away and try to practice. So psychological flexibility is the term that we use to describe our ability to be present, to be open to our emotions, and to adapt or change our behavior so it aligns with our values, even when we're experiencing challenging times, pressure at work, stress. And so it's something that's really useful for us to develop when we're working in roles like yours, because it helps us to be able to step back. It helps us to be able to see the bigger picture, and it helps us to manage that experience of stress and pressure that we might be feeling. And so here, these are my 3 kind of top things to do. First is to practice pausing and noticing. And I deliberately say this instead of putting an hour aside every day for strategic thinking, because I know all of us want to be able to do more strategic work. But when we're caught up in a cycle of pressure and stress, suddenly blocking out time in our calendars is really, really difficult. So I want you to start small. I want you to start by trying to count to 5 before you respond to someone. Just pausing for a moment before you ask a question or immediately saying yes. I want you to try and wait 30 minutes before replying to that email that pings up saying urgent. And once you've taken that pause, I want you to notice what you're thinking and what you're feeling, because what happens stress pressured is we sort of go into an autopilot mode. We just keep going, we keep our head down, we stay focused, and we stop paying attention to what's going on. And so by pausing and starting to notice the thoughts and feelings that we're having, we can start to create that perspective. And as we practice this, then creating that space for the bigger, more strategic work that you want to be doing starts to become a bit easier. The other thing to say, though, is if you have been working in a state of stress for a while, noticing your thoughts and feelings might be quite difficult. We can kind of find that they just become automatic and sort of float in and out. So you might need to start by thinking about your body, noticing what's going on in your body. So perhaps you're holding tension in your shoulders. Perhaps you're clenching your jaw. So starting to notice in your body might be the place to start. Okay. Second of all, I want you to pay attention to what matters to you, but to start to try and hold it a little bit more lightly. So knowing what our values are is actually not always quite as clear cut as we think it is. So I imagine you all want to make a difference. Helping other people is important to you. But there might be some values which are a bit deeper than that, which are important. So first of all, I want you to start to try and unpick what those are. And one of the easiest ways to do this is notice when you have what feels perhaps like a negative response to someone. There's probably a values clash under there. So try to notice that and ask yourself why that matters, or help you understand what is important for you and why things perhaps stress you out. So again, we can create a bit of that distance. And second of all, I want you to hold this a little bit more lightly. I want you to be able to care deeply about the work, but not hold on to it. So when we hold on to something tightly, that's when it becomes overwhelming for us, when it becomes more stressful. If we can loosen that hold on to it, we can reduce that stress a little bit. And finally, I want you to see if you can shift how you talk to yourself. What I've noticed, again, through my time in the sector and in this work that I do now, is that there is often guilt, and people often think they're not doing a very good job, they're not leading well. And that inner voice is saying that to them. And what can happen is if we have these very negative thoughts and we hear them a lot, they gradually start to feel like facts to us. So you'll see in this example I've put, you might be thinking something like, I'm so bad at this job. The first thing to try to do to shift this is instead try saying to yourself, I'm having the thought that I'm so bad at this job. So we're creating a little bit of distance. Then once you've got that down, try, I'm noticing I'm having the thought that I'm so bad at this job. And again, we're starting to separate that thought from ourselves. We're stopping it being automatically true. And then we can try to shift the thought into something a little bit more positive and a little bit kinder to ourselves. Like, I'm doing my best given the circumstances I'm in. And so by using these 3 techniques, we can start to create distance, we can start to create perspective, and we can start to manage the stress and the pressure that we're feeling a bit more effectively. And so, as I say, what you do as a leader ripples out into your organisation. And so if you start to adopt ways of taking care of yourself and building your psychological flexibility, your teams will see that and they will start to copy that behaviour that you model. And I suppose I wanted to leave you with some things to think about that support your culture more broadly, that build a healthy culture which can support this. So having a really clear vision, mission and values which you as a leader and your leadership team live by and model in terms of how you behave. It's number 1. Creating trust. Facilitating honest conversations and disagreement. Often I think we feel like disagreement is a bad thing. But actually, disagreement is really, really helpful for us as long as it's done respectfully. But if we enable all the different voices to be heard, we can find consensus and we can find a way forward. We need to make it safe to make mistakes. And I think this can be difficult within our sector because often making mistakes can have a big impact on the work that we do. But if we don't make it safe for people to make mistakes, they can't talk to us about what's going on. We can't have trust and we can't have safety. We need to be really clear and realistic about expectations and, as a result, accountability and keeping people to account. I think it's really easy for us in the sector to overpromise what we can achieve. Yes, of course, we can get that done. But actually, we're often setting ourselves up to fail. And so by having the honest and difficult conversations about what's realistic, we can actually be more effective. Focusing on giving people time to build relationship and connection. Often what I hear is that different teams, different departments are working in silos and pulling in different directions, trying to get to different bits of the vision and the mission. If we focus on building those relationships and making sure people understand different roles and responsibilities, it's much easier for us to have a healthy culture and to get where we need to be. Addressing and challenging presenteeism. I think we've probably all been guilty of coming into work when we shouldn't do, but really kind of addressing that aspect of well-being is a big way to create a culture that prioritizes staff well-being. Trying to make sure there is time for reflection and strategy within our weeks, not just stuck in back-to-back meetings. That's why we need to do the psychological flexibility work first before we come to this. Making sure that your organisation promotes learning and development, and not just of kind of your core trainings if possible. And making sure there's time for rest and recovery. So really encouraging people to take their lunch breaks, taking time out, making it okay to go for a 5-minute walk if you need to clear your head, making sure people are taking their annual leave. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and I'm mindful of our time. So we'll break for questions in a second. If today's topics resonated for you and you want to explore this in more detail, please feel free to drop me an email at alex@clearseacoaching.co.uk, or you can come and find me over on LinkedIn.
We'll let you all get on with your well-deserved break then. Enjoy the rest of your lunch, and thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. As Alex has said, if you want to reach out to her following on from the session, if you feel she could be of benefit to you personally or the organisation, I know she's really willing to take your calls. And obviously, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't just say to you about Charity Recruit. If you are looking to recruit into your charity to ease the load for yourselves, do bear us in mind. We specialise in senior leadership roles within charity and not-for-profit organisations. So thank you for joining us. We run events every month, so keep your eye on our events page, and we'd love to see you at an event in the future. Thanks so much, everyone, and especially thanks to Alex.